So I have the honor of speaking with Jeff Verdon, who is an asset protection attorney in California. And I hope that you find this interview really interesting. So, welcome, Jeff. It's so good to have you here. If you could introduce yourself and just let
Sure.
our audience know a little bit about you and what you do and where you are right now, even.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you and a real honor. So look forward to our discussion. Right now, I'm sitting in a little bay in Croatia, having arrived a couple of days ago. And to try to work this interview, this was the only way we could get it set up. And we have Starlink on the boat, so we should have good reception. So I'm looking forward to our chat.
So let's dive in. So, Jeff, I asked you because, I get a lot of questions from my clients about asset protection. What happens if I get sued? How do I know that my stuff will be protected? So can you tell us a little bit, what is asset protection? What should people be concerned about?
It's a question I get all the time, and it's something I've been preaching from the mountaintop for 40 years or more. I started my career, I law school, then an LLM in tax, and worked in the estate and trust area, and doing traditional work that we as estate planners are trained and taught, which is essentially to transfer wealth from one generation to the other, down to the kids and grandkids with the least amount of tax and administrative cost and interference, and that we have this presumption that our clients for whom we do estate planning are going to die, their assets are going to be preserved and pass on to the next generation, and consequently, everything will work out as planned. The problem with that is if a black swan event is to hit the whereby they're involved in litigation, the estate planning work that was done for that client by their estate planning firm, particularly if their assets are housed in a revocable living trust like most people have, or perhaps they just have wills with no trust. Those assets are susceptible to a judgment creditor, and the judgment creditor can take all or most of what they have. So the estate planning process is really an inadequate process unless you build around the estate plan that you do vehicles, buckets, as I like to refer to them as, that have qualities and properties such that a future judgment creditor will not be able to reach those assets. And when you create that environment, then the plaintiff has to really think about whether or not they want to pursue a claim against a defendant when the defendant that really is not going to be in a position to be able to turn over much in the way of their holdings because they no longer own them, because they're in structures that the plaintiff will have no legal access to. And as I like to say, if you can remove the profit from the pursuit, you get the parties into a more effective mindset to talk about settling and settling cheap and settling quick, which is what you want.
Did you know my mom has a monthly newsletter where she shares helpful information? Click below to join.
So, Jeff, you mentioned that there's some structures that we can put in place. Would you mind talking a little bit more about that? What are these structures?
Well, our most effective asset protection strategy for liquid assets, stocks, bonds, cash, cryptocurrencies, if clients have it, things that are fungible, is to set up a trust in a foreign jurisdiction, have the accounts open under the name of the trust in a foreign jurisdiction like Switzerland, have the accounts held overseas, managed by the client's wealth managers. And so the assets are outside of the United States jurisdiction. So once assets are 10 miles outside of New York Harbor, court no longer has any authority over. And if you're not the trustee of the trust, you have an independent third-party trust company managing the trust, and you do this at a time when you have no current, threatened, or foreseeable creditors, you haven't committed a fraudulent transfer. And therefore, those assets are much safer and can be accessed, as I mentioned, to or for the benefit of the beneficiary in this structure. Now, when people hear the concept of a foreign trust, they think of palm trees and coconuts and somebody running off with their money. I wouldn't have a client unless I was able to educate them on the benefits and the safeguards and the guardrails that we build into these structures. So that's not going to happen. And in doing this for over 40 years, we haven't had a client, lose any money to theft or embezzlement or anything like that. What it does do is it takes these assets off the table as far as a future potential creditor. It's almost like a nest egg. We like to refer to it as a nest egg trust. So you take a portion of your wealth that you want to make sure you can never lose, you're never going to be broke, and you drop it into this trust. It's completely tax neutral. The IRS prints hundreds of forms that US taxpayers have to fill out and file when they have transactions internationally. So the IRS doesn't, it's not illegal to do that. The IRS doesn't care that you go offshore. You just have to tell them about it. So when we set up one of these trusts, we make sure our client's CPA knows what tax forms to file. There's 2 or 3 forms. That's all they have to do. And once you tell the Department of Treasury that you have this, it's very transparent. They know that you have it. You're going to pay the same income tax before and after. It's not an international trust to lower your income taxes. It's simply designed to be able to park assets that you may need someday because some catastrophic lawsuit. And quite frankly, one of the things that everybody seeks, but particularly wealthy people, because they realize they have targets on their backs, is they want peace of mind. And if you know you're never going to be broke, you never have to come home and tell your family, we're in a lawsuit, we may lose everything. And I've had clients that have had to do that. It really does create a much more robust and healthy environment for all concerned. Now, for those assets that you can't move offshore, like the personal residence that might have millions of dollars of equity. I happen to live in a state like California that has a very small homestead exemption. New York has a small homestead, $500,000. Nevada. Most states, other than Florida and Texas and a few others, which have unlimited homestead exemptions, most people whose homes have appreciated have substantial equity in their homes. And so one of the things we do is we take their home and we drop it into a structure we call the HELP Trust. HELP is an acronym called Home Equity and Lifestyle Protection Trust. We drop the structure into a trust and we have the client rent the house back from the structure. So we convert the client from an owner to a tenant. And we do this at a time when they have no current, foreseeable, or present creditors. And by doing this, by paying rent payments, fair market value rent payments to the trust, and by being a tenant under a written lease versus an owner, if subsequently the individual were to be sued and they were trying to go after the house, they don't own their house any longer. So the asset's not on the table for a potential future creditor. Now, obviously, you have to make sure that you don't violate applicable voidable transaction laws. And we take great pains to vet our clients to make sure when they hire us, they're not doing it because they've got some creditor biting at their heels. Now, if something happens down the road and they have a creditor, well, they've already done the planning, they no longer own the assets, their creditor doesn't have a right to it. So for a personal residence or a vacation home, the HELP Trust is an excellent way to protect those assets. In California, we have something called a private retirement plan or private retirement trust. It's a specific exemption statute under California's exemption laws that a person who's employed by a business or owns a business can set up their own retirement trust. It's not necessarily tax qualified or ERISA qualified, but it still constitutes a retirement trust. And in California, assets which are held in a private retirement trust are exempt from creditors. They put the assets into the trust, and even when they receive the distributions down the road at retirement, they've got a qualified plan, but it doesn't provide enough retirement income for them because the contributions are somewhat limited depending upon age and so forth. They want to supplement their qualified plan. Their employer can form a private retirement trust, fund it with assets which they own. It's not tax qualified, so there's no contribution deduction, there's no tax deferral, but it's a plan that supplements their present qualified plan. If they happen to be involved in a lawsuit down the road, whatever assets they put into the plan are not going to be subject to creditor claims under a specific exemption statute that we have in California. So it's probably the best asset protection plan no one's ever heard of. It's been in the law since 1970. It predates ERISA. But here's the thing. If you set up a private retirement plan and you put assets into the retirement trust, they have to stay there until you retire. So you can't put it. So if you need those assets for consumption versus investment, then we look to the asset protection trust or other vehicles that we have.
Okay. So now, do you really have to send assets overseas, or is it enough to maybe send them to a state that is easier to do asset protection? Like I've heard, like Delaware and Nevada, they talk about these, nings and dings and all of that.
Right. So here's the problem. The first asset protection trust law was enacted in this country in Alaska in 1997. Nevada followed along. And then over the last, 20 some years, we've had about 25 or 30 states that have adopted some form of what we call self-settled spendthrift trust law. When you've set up an irrevocable trust and you're also both the creator and the beneficiary, that's a self-settled trust. And none of the states back in those days would allow one to set up a trust in which they were a beneficiary and protect those assets from creditors. So the states like Alaska and Nevada were losing all this business to overseas trust companies, and they started to enact some laws and bring business to their state. Here's the problem. And again, without getting too far into the weeds under the conflicts of laws issues, but we don't really yet know certain legislation, whether if you live in California and you set up a trust in Nevada, an asset protection trust, and you put assets in that trust, whether a California court is going to give deference to that trust. Because the way the voidable transaction laws work is they apply the law of the jurisdiction of the debtor, of the person setting up the trust.
Uh-oh.
A lot of lawyers don't realize this. That was a recent change when they revamped the fraudulent transfer laws. So you set up a trust in Nevada, you're a beneficiary of the trust, you get sued. Will the California voidable transactions laws cause the law that's to be applied in Nevada, California law or Nevada law? We don't know yet. We're not really sure. It's still, like most things in law, it takes many, many, many years for the cases to come out and appeals to happen. So I'm just not a big fan of the uncertainties, the vagaries. If you're sitting in my office wanting asset protection planning and you have enough money to matter to where you want to protect that from the bad guy, future bad guy, and you have a choice of having an offshore trust, which is pretty rock solid. It's about the most protective vehicle we have in our toolkit, or we have to rely upon laws in other jurisdictions that we're not really sure yet apply. If you live in Nevada or you live in Alaska or you live in Delaware, it may be a different story. But if you don't live in the jurisdiction in which you set up the trust, then we're not absolutely certain. Now, if you talk to my good friend Steve Oceans, who's a Nevada asset protection lawyer, he'll tell you, well, we've never had a client have a Nevada asset protection trust busted. That may be true, but I have to deal with what's in front of me, and the law is the law. It's evolved. And so if somebody wants, somebody has a couple million or 5 million or $100 million they want to protect from, some giant creditor, the better they have options. And I tell them what their options are, but the best option, the most certainty, is going to be setting it up in an offshore trust. Now, they can keep the money at Merrill Lynch, they can keep the money at Goldman Sachs or Bank of America or wherever they want to, but have it in the foreign trust. So you get the benefit of the protections of those laws.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. This is really eye-opening. There's so many nuances. Now, so if somebody is in this situation and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, they can go to my website, and on the website, I have a couple of important tools. I have an exemption analyzer, which if they live in California, they may qualify for private retirement plan. They can go on the website, fill out the exemption analyzer, just click the link, and there's 2 pages of questions, personal information, then their assets, and it'll generate a report that will show which assets are exempt, which assets are partially exempt, and which assets aren't exempt from creditor claims. Secondly, I have a lawsuit exposure and stress test. Most people aren't really sure if they have liability exposure. So by completing about 20 questions, takes about 8 or 10 minutes, and there's an answer key. If they score on the rather higher end of the answer key, they should be talking to a lawyer about asset protection, or at least talk to an estate planning lawyer to upgrade their present estate plan to one that has asset protection qualities. And so going to our website would be a great place. Calling my office and reaching out to myself or my assistant, Nick Miranda, would be also a great place to start and have a consultation with us.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. Please enjoy your time in Croatia. And I know that our viewers will find so much value from this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real honor, and appreciate you having me on today. Thank you.
If this video is helpful for you, share it to someone else who might benefit from it.